Welcome to our podcast, Fear Less, Do More. Here we're going to take a deep dive into the minds of some really daring, impactful change makers. I'm your host, Gill Hunter, and I'm the managing partner at Square One Law. In each episode, we're going to meet some innovators, some trailblazers, and we're going to talk about their successes, their fears, their challenges, and their lived experiences. We're going to understand their secrets to their resilience and their source of their passion, so that we can understand what drives them to achieve. These are all leaders who inspire us to step out of our own comfort zones and fear less, do more. Welcome to the next edition of our podcast, Fear Less, Do More. And today I'm joined by Brendon Hayward, who's the Joint Managing Director at OSBIT. Hi, Brendon.
Hi, Jill.
Great to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks.
In our pre-chat, I discovered all sorts of things I didn't know about you, which have made me think even more about you being a fearless business leader. But at the moment, for those who don't know OSBIT, can you just give sort of a quick overview of what OSBIT does?
Sure. So we design and build and deliver bespoke technology to enable the offshore industry, particularly offshore wind, because there's so much going on, but also we're in a small niche in oil and gas, which is called well intervention, which also enables decommissioning of oil and gas.
Basically, I mean, you make massive pieces of equipment. The sort of things that you see on oil rigs and floating in the North Sea all the time, but all from Riding Mill.
Yeah, so we started in 2010. We're now up to about 140 people, predominantly engineers, but obviously all the support functions that enable us to work as a business. But we just have incredible people doing incredible things.
And you're the co-founder of the business. What was that like, starting a business with someone else?
It's just a great journey, really. I mean, in some ways, I feel slightly like I cheated, but because obviously Tony was the primary founder and he'd done it lots before. So I guess you could call it, say we had a comfort blanket in having a seasoned entrepreneur leading it. But we started with 7 people and we grew. I think we had 86 permanent people when we sold to Ventura 2 years ago. And it's just been a really interesting, fascinating, challenging, but fun journey.
And you'll have seen a lot of change in the industry as well. In over that time in oil and gas, a lot of pressure, obviously, on those more traditional energy producers to become greener. But you're very engaged with renewable energy, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we actually started in renewables. So the very first project we did was a small water power generation unit, like an Archimedes screw. The second project we did was an access system for offshore wind, and that's actually where we focused a lot of our design horsepower at that point in time, because we were very small. So we started there. We then, because of all the experience we had as a team and the new team members that joined, you're a business, you need to pay the bills, so you went out and you looked for work. And we ended up for a few years doing a lot of work in oil and gas, but largely within well intervention, as I said. And then we've moved back over, so we're very dominated by offshore wind because of the huge plans globally for offshore wind.
And you're joint MD. How do you make that work in the business? How do you work out who's going to do what and then keep off each other's patch?
Well, I mean, we have specific areas. So I'm an engineer by degree, but I always had a real belief that as a business doing engineering, you have to start by getting the commercials right. So I had an interest in the commercial side. Always been very passionate about people and culture. So I tend to lead in that, but I still get involved with in engineering and some of the projects and the technical challenges. I think the joint MD thing, it's brilliant because I've done it as a lone position as well. And actually, it's quite lonely. And the other factor of being human is you can't be on your best form every single day. You can't bring the energy that a business needs every single day, particularly at OSBIT. We're very, very fast paced. But I don't think you could fabricate that. So Robbie and I had worked together for years, and I have reflected. I don't think you could fabricate it. I'm not sure you could recruit for it, and it's a bit like a marriage, insofar as you've got to have trust, you've got to give each other space, you've got to communicate, you've got to have fun together. So I think, we've never sat down and listed out each person's strengths and weaknesses, but we know them, and we just complement each other, work together. And I think the other really key thing is neither of us have an ego, and we have shared values. Our core values are the same. So there's lots of discussions which aren't really a discussion because it doesn't even need to take place because we know what the other's going to say. But the energy side, you could almost compare us to rowing, because on a good day, we can cover a hell of a lot of ground together. And then if one of us is off, the other one puts in the grunt. And then that's the way it works. And it's brilliant.
It sounds like you're in sort of perfect harmony. I'm sure that there must be times when things don't run as smoothly, I think, but if you've got that common value set, then you resolve things in a way that works for both of you. I think it's so important if you're in business with other people that you do have that. If that bit's off, then the whole thing doesn't work.
Well, I think for quite a lot of years, I've always thought that one of the biggest causes of an organisation to fail is communication. And in some ways, kind of hierarchy or title allows you to become lazy around communication. And that's not good enough. Everybody, we're human, our communication is imperfect. So you've got to be just doing it better all the time. So whether that's me and Robbie or throughout the organisation, we're just always working on our communication. I genuinely, I don't think, there's times we've probably agreed to disagree, but we never have an argument. You just work through it, as you said.
You mentioned people and you mentioned culture, and they're things that you're obviously very passionate about. And I know you had an interest in psychology as well.
Yeah.
Is that, which came first in all of that?
I don't know. I think I often reflect that a lot of my core lessons in business originated from being a farm boy. And I don't know, when you're growing up around animals and machinery and everything else, you want to know how everything works. And the fascinating thing with animals is the communication gap that you're always trying to bridge and work out. And I think in business, I love machinery. I love the engineering that I can't really claim to do any anymore, but that I did. In my mind, I'm still doing it in a business. The business is the ultimate machine. When you're designing a machine, you're working within the laws of physics. When you're building a business, there aren't any laws to follow, which makes it even more fun and fascinating. Yeah, a big part of any business is people. As soon as you've got people, you've got psychology. You need a great culture. And I think often when people talk about culture, there's a slight tone of it's a nice to have, but it's not business critical. I would argue it is, because if a business is interested in scrap or rework or any kind of inefficiency, a non-optimal culture is driving massive amounts of inefficiency in your business. So a good culture is nice to have, and you want to look after people, etc. but actually it just comes back to profitability as well. It all aligns. Whichever one you care about most, do the right thing for one and it's doing the right thing for the other.
Yeah, happy people work hard.
Yeah, exactly.
And are engaged and want to see the company succeed. If you've got disengaged people who don't feel like there is a culture, then it seems obvious to me that that's going to have an impact, not just on your people, but on the business itself.
Yeah.
So did you sort of get into psychology by wanting to understand how your team worked together better? Or did you always have that sort of interest in people and then you've used some of that knowledge to build your teams?
I think it probably started with, I worked on the farm for as long as I remember. I think in the early years, I'm not sure how much valuable work I did, but I was pretending to work. But I do remember probably of age about 8, 9, and I was trying to get employees on the farm to do what I wanted them to do. Now, obviously, at that age, you can't just tell somebody what you want them to do because they're not going to listen. You can't play a hierarchy card or a title card. So you have to get them to believe in what you're trying to achieve. Even if it's a small task, explain why you want it done. And I felt that right into my early career, and it's still relevant now, those lessons, because in the end, you've got to empower people, you've got to get them to believe. And a huge part of psychology, I also believe, and culture within a business is you need people to challenge the business, everything they're doing, but ultimately, the limiting factor is usually their self-limiting beliefs. And if you can get a culture where people are also brave enough to challenge their self-limiting beliefs, then it's really fun.
So how do you do that then?
Safety. And honesty, authenticity. In what we do in OSBIT, as you mentioned, we do some massive equipment. There is a lot of inherent hazards that we need to take account of, plan, risk assess, to look after people's physical safety. But the same goes for people's psychological safety. So we're a creative business. We're solving problems. In order to have a really dynamic and energized team, people have to feel psychologically safe to put the silly idea on the table or say, I don't know how to do this. Can I get help? We deliberately built a business with a very, very flat hierarchy. So all OSBIT engineers are called OSBIT engineer. They're not paid the same, but paid on experience, etc. People are rewarded differently. But very flat hierarchy, no departments. So we've tried to build an organisation where people can be agile, they can ask lots of questions. We don't have egos in the business, but then, of course, ego is just the symptom of imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is what we'd want people to be challenging around their self-limiting beliefs. But it all comes down to how do we engage? How do I engage with people? Am I polite, respectful, encouraging? I always think you can try and do those things, but if you're secretly relying on your title, people can smell a rat. Like, unconsciously or consciously, they'll smell a rat. You just got to be yourself. And also have a laugh. With everybody. I
think that's right. It's building that trust, isn't it? And that authenticity. And when people say to me, what advice would you give me when I start out in a career in law? I always say, just be yourself. Mm-hmm. Because if you start off your career behaving, being what you think a lawyer, for example, should look like, you're going to have to keep that up for a long time. Yeah. And people will see through it and won't trust you as a result. Yep. So I think it's that authenticity piece. I know it's become a bit of a buzzword, but I think it is really, really important, and it's quite key from a leadership point of view. of unlocking that trust with your people, that if you say something, you mean it because you are authentic and true to yourself. So that really, resonates with me. You've mentioned your farming sort of background a couple of times there. Farming is notoriously a tough industry, and I think it's getting tougher because there are huge pressures on farmers now. You told me a story which had, I think the words were, every time I got kicked by the cow, I laughed. You've obviously learned a lot of lessons through your farming time that you've been useful in business. Can you share that story? Because I think it's brilliant.
Well, I think, so when you work with animals, again, what you learn is that they're just judging you on, do they feel safe with you? And if you take your ego or your self-importance or whatever you think you've achieved, they just won't trust you. They're not going to read your mind into all that, but they'll get a sense and they won't trust you. And so I think the story was cow calves, Saturday night, probably midnight, as it normally when they need help, it'll be that time. And you're out and you're trying to get the calf to suck or whatever. And if you don't approach it with complete authenticity and just being yourself, the cow will be edgy. And then, our cows are very quiet, but she'll give you a kick and it hurts. But yeah, it almost makes me laugh when I get a kick or I find myself face down in the muck, because it's one of those grounding moments. And I think the other story I related to was just like yesterday. I was about 7, I remember this, and we were sorting out sheep, and I wanted to be part of it. And of course, not very happy at 7. And I started trying to catch the sheep, and of course the sheep were heavier than me. But I wouldn't let go. And at the end of the day, I can still remember being covered in my own blood, in sheep muck, I'd just been dragged all the way around the shed. And Mum and Dad did try and make me stop on a number of occasions. But it's not stubbornness, because that implies an ignorance, and I'm not. I'm fastidious about gathering information. But also perseverance is a bit of a soft word. It's like dogged, unrelenting pursuit of the goal. And that was a big lesson for me. By the end of the day, I'd learned the technique, but I'd had to get dragged through the muck a lot.
And how have those things, do you reflect on that when you got a business problem? Do you think, well, in a farming context, this is what I would have done?
I think it's the character traits. I think just not giving up. I've always been immensely lucky because I've worked with so many incredibly academic people. The OSBIT team are just incredible, amazing. So many bright people. And obviously we've taken a lot of graduates and student placements, and it's just inspiring to be around so many amazing people academically. I've never really, I think I'm bright, but I've never really put myself in the academic box. But I think if I look across all my life and all the different achievements inside of work and OSBIT and outside of that, I'm not sure I've ever met anybody as doggedly stubborn as me. That's been a character trait of just, there is a way to solve the problem. I will get there. And it doesn't matter how many times I fall down and how much muck I get covered in. I will get to the solution.
So you just think back to that sheep and think, I will catch the sheep, I just need the right technique.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the business has gone through quite a big change in the last couple of years. So you successfully sold the business to a large international group. I have to say, I think it's probably one of the best integration pieces that I've ever seen when business has been sold to a large corporate like that, particularly where the owner manager stays in the business and continues to perform that role. Would you agree? And what has been the secret of that successful integration?
I haven't really reflected on it, to be honest. And it's the first time I've ever been through that transition personally. I think it has been good. I would also attribute it to common values. The Ventera team have a huge amount of experience. They're very professional, which, that's an obvious word, but it's not a given. In their demeanour, they're professional. That's not a given. Yeah. Everybody's expected to be professional, legally. And they're nice people. They're very bright. But as always, they challenge us, and rightly so. We had a pretty painful period through COVID, and which wasn't under Ventera's tenure, but then at the end of that, and also last year, we had the global supply chain volatility, and it hurt us because we do lump sum projects. And we learned from that because we had to change some of our contracting models. We just weren't prepared for that level of volatility in the global market. But I think hats off to Ventera to, they challenged us hard, and there were some uncomfortable conversations, but they did it well, and they didn't make short-term decisions over the long term, which would have hurt the business, and we respect them for that. So again, it comes back to communication, teamwork. We try and help each other. They've got big ambitions, which means we do, and we're ambitious anyway. We're always ambitious. So again, it's that alignment of values as people as well as businesses.
So what's next for the business? You mentioned ambition there. What is the ambition for OSBIT?
So Ventera continues to grow the group with fantastic ambitions around enabling, particularly offshore wind. OSBIT is a key part of that. We can enable the green energy transition with all the technology that we do and the engineering horsepower. We're doing more and more of that. But also just what other problems are there to solve? How can we bring on more people? Obviously, there's a skills shortage right across, not just offshore wind or offshore indeed, it's the whole world, isn't it? So bringing more people on, developing them, training them, keeping them engaged, all of that piece makes the journey an exciting one.
And what about you personally? What sort of stuff do you do outside of being on a farm, which I would imagine would take up quite a lot of your time outside of work? But what are your sort of interests and
so we had a baby about a year ago. So we've got a 1-year-old who loves tractors. There's that. I have always loved hiking. There's a lot of similarities, I think, in also in hiking with business, because you think you're getting to the highest point, and then you get there and you realise that there's another high point behind it. But the point is, you keep having to turn around and look at what you've achieved, how far you've come, and also feel a bit of the burn in the muscles, which just feels great. We've got pedigree Aberdeen Angus cattle. There's a bit of part of a weekend job is diversifying the farm. But I think you mentioned earlier about agriculture, and as a tough industry, it is, and that's also one of the interests for me, because I think if you can make money in agriculture, it teaches you a lot of lessons in other businesses. Offshore wind is a very, very tight market to make money in. It's very constrained, so it's all about how you perform as a business, the quality of the work you're winning, how you execute it, the skills gap, how you make sure that you're ahead of the curve, which comes back to culture, etc.
So hiking,
Yeah.
favourite route? Where would that
There's something about that route along Langdale. So I've got a golden retriever who was my first love, and he's about 12 now. But we've hiked so much together, and before I met my wife, just going out and hiking together on adventures, complete bliss.
And what would you hope that for your child in the future? What if you could pick for them to do something in life? What would it be?
Well, it's a bit of a cliche, but whatever makes them happy. I mean, I think what I've learned though is that is closely coupled with psychology. So hopefully we will bring them up in an environment where they can be bold, challenge their own beliefs and fears, because what makes you happy in the short term isn't necessarily what's going to deliver maximum happiness long term. Me personally, I've always been obsessed with evolving as a person, like learning, reinventing authentically, like who I am and what I'm doing. So if you'd asked me when I was a child, I probably would have said I just want to stay on the farm and play with tractors. But a big part of that would have been lack of confidence, being very introverted and shy. It was only through challenging all of that that I've had the opportunities to have all these amazing experiences.
So where have you found that inner sort of motivation and strength to do that? Because if you are naturally introverted, that's quite a big thing to do.
It is, yeah. Good question. I think I put a higher priority on evolving than my shyness. So that had to just come along for the ride. And therefore, there's been loads of moments where I've just thought, I'm just way out my depth here. But of course you find a solution, you get on with it.
We've heard quite a bit there about the sort of fearless journey that you've been on, challenging yourself, doing fantastic things in business, having a really interesting and fulfilling home life and working on the farm and learning from animals, all that sort of stuff. What would you like in the future to be doing more of?
I think what I'm very focused on is impact. In order to make an impact, you need money. So it has to come from making money, and all businesses have to make money in order to have great cultures. But I think continuing to have an impact, one of the ways you're brought up as a farmer is leave the environment better than you found it, look after what's around you. And that's part of my DNA. So I think that's part of it. I'm obviously on the board of the Entrepreneurs Forum, and I'm chairman of a charity for disadvantaged kids in Elvick for a lot of years. So all of that is having an impact. I think the Venterra vision and journey is really exciting. I'm committed to working with them on delivering that and the rest of the OSBIT team.
Thanks ever so much for your time.
Thank you.
And for being so honest and authentic and sharing with me. Thank you for listening to Fear Less, Do More. All of our guests come from a diverse range of backgrounds, but they all share a common drive to face their fears, take action, and create meaningful impact. If you've enjoyed this episode of our podcast, please follow us, Square One Law, on Instagram and LinkedIn, and share the content with your friends, family, and networks. Thank you, and see you again on our next episode.